Well, hey, Summit family, here we are, session number 5 of our journey group study through the book of Galatians. We believe that God has something unique to say to each one of us, and that through these journey groups, we're going to be encouraged, we're going to be strengthened, and we're going to develop genuine, authentic community. I pray that this group, and this is a place where your real life encounters authentic faith. Well, here we are. As we ended chapter 3, Paul was pointing us to the fact that there is no distinction in God's sight between Jews and Gentiles. Nor does God distinguish between male and female, or slaves and those who are free. These are the words that he writes. Paul says, there is no longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female. For you are all Christians. You are one in Christ Jesus. And now that you belong to Christ, you are true children of Abraham. You are his heirs. And now all the promises God gave him belong to you. All of the promises that God gave to Abraham belong to you as children of Abraham. So Paul is digging in at the heart of the Galatian church. Guys, it's not law. It's not law that frees you. It's Jesus. And when you find freedom in Christ, you become a child of Abraham, a child of God, an heir to his promises. Well, Paul will unpack that later on in this chapter. But to start with, he's saying ultimately, salvation is offered to all, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender or their status, that God welcomes all his children, all those who belong to Christ. They are the true descendants of Abraham, he says, and they are the heirs of the promise God made to him. So we are no longer slaves trying to keep the laws, but we are children delighting in his promises. This is a much better place to be. Yet Paul's concerned that the Galatians are slipping back into slavery. Now, they're not sliding back into the slavery of Israel in the Old Testament where they're like imprisoned and they're punished in a physical sense. But what Paul's saying is spiritually, they're falling back and slipping into slavery because they're trying to live by law, not by grace, faith, or promise. So Paul asks this question: what has happened to your joy? What has happened to your joy? And as we read this chapter, I think we begin to see this. I get this picture of the movie Inside Out from Disney. You know, where inside this young girl, she has all of these emotions that are living. And there's this one emotion, and her name's joy. And she's so full of life and bubbly and excited. And this is what Paul sees in the Galatian church to start with. They're full of joy. But all of a sudden, all their core memories are being held by sadness. And so their joy turns from bubbly excitement to sorrow and sadness. Almost like a giant Eeyore. And they're on this journey. And so Paul knows that something's gone seriously wrong with the Galatians. Because he remembers that their care for him was endless when he was ill. There's even the imagery that perhaps his illness was affecting his eyesight because the church in Galatia would give their eyes to him in those days. But since then, they seem to have lost all their joy, all their commitment. Sadness has started to hold on to the core memories. And now they're becoming blue and gloomy. Not happy and full of joy. Now maybe you know some people that have walked through that. Maybe you know those moments when you see the people that you interact with on a regular basis and they're so bubbly and excited, and then the next day you see them and they're gloomy and sad. Their joy has been ripped from them for whatever reason. I'm notorious for seeing young people around and always saying to them and looking them straight in the eyes and say, smile. Come on, just smile. Because it seems like they're walking around with frowns and pouts, and we're full of joy. Smile. Life, it can suck. I get it. But there's so much joy found in Christ. And so what Paul does is he transitions in this letter after recognizing that something's stolen their joy. He wants them to see that there's a promise of hope and life bigger than what they're wrestling through right now. So Paul uses another example of the difference between law and promise. He uses the very scriptures which the Jewish teachers are using to impose the law on the Gentile Christians. And so he rolls back to Abraham yet again. But this time, he takes them to the books of the law and the story of Abraham and how Abraham has two sons. In case you're not familiar with it, God gave Abraham the promise that he would be the father of many nations. Well, Abraham and his wife Sarah were unable to have children, so they thought they would master a plan that would have this come to fruition faster and easier in their own mind. And so Abraham wound up having a child with their servant Hagar. And afterwards, Abraham and Sarah conceived a child. And so you had two children, two sons, Ishmael, born of Hagar, and Isaac, born of Sarah. The first, Ishmael, who was born of the slave woman Hagar. The second, Isaac, born of his wife Sarah. One, Hagar, Ishmael was born a slave. The other, Isaac, was born free. And so Paul uses these two pictures to paint law and gospel. Law, gospel. The law was given through Moses on Mount Sinai. And that mountain is like the mother that produces children of slavery. The earthly Jerusalem is the same, he says. The capital of a Judaism which is enslaved to ritual, sacrifice, and legalism. That is Ishmael, born of Hagar. But there is another mother. And that is the new Jerusalem, Paul says, which is in heaven. She is like Abraham's wife, Sarah, and she is free, and her children are free. They are not slave children of the law, but free children of the promise. Not bound by law, free of the promises of God. So Paul's saying the same thing that he's been reiterating over and over in chapters 1, 2, and 3, and now into 4. That freedom's not found in the law, that freedom's found in Jesus. That the law imprisons, but the gospel sets us free. That the law is a slave, but the promises of God, they are freedom, hope, and life. So Paul wants the church to know that they are not bound by law, but they're free in Christ. That because of this freedom, they are children of Abraham. They are not the Jews who observe circumcision or keep the Sabbath. That the real children of Abraham are those who keep the faith in Christ, and because of their faith in Christ have become children of God. Paul is arguing with the Jewish teachers on their own ground, and guess what? He's winning. He wants them to realize the limitations of the law and accept instead the freedom of Christ. And that freedom leads us to the fact that we are called to an adventurous life full of hope and full of joy. That Jesus, in fact, did not come to bring a new set of bars for our cages. That he came, in fact, to tame the tiger that's inside of us and to release us to live as he himself lived in this world, free and full of joy. The meaning of our lives, the adventure of it, isn't to be found in cages that Christians make for themselves and decorate them so attractively. No, 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 no. The meaning and the joy for us is to be found stepping outside those old cages, diminishing the no longer needed legalism, and setting out into the future as sons and daughters of God, living life to the full of joy, full of hope, full of life. It's an adventurous life, not bound by the law, but free in Christ, not bound in cages that we make look really pretty, but free to run and to dance and to live as children of God, welcoming the promises of God and living an epic adventure for him. I'm going to turn it back over to your Journey Group hosts and leaders, and they're going to take you through a series of questions that'll help you unpack this chapter. And I pray that as you unpack this chapter, that in your authentic community, that your real life will encounter authentic